I gotta first also thank Mike and Cindy. This was scheduled for a couple of weeks ago, and I got a call from Sean Hannity that asked if I would if I could be the first congressman to ever host his 3-hour radio show. And I said, I've got a commitment, let me see, because I don't know if I'll be able to do it or not. And that was a commitment. The other things on that day I could have moved, but I didn't know if it was going to be possible to change the town hall. So I called Mike and Cindy, and I said, Sean Hannity wants me to host his 3-hour radio show the same day I've committed to you to be at a town hall, and you're my first commitment. So, you know, if you say, no, let's keep the date here, then I don't do it. She said, are you kidding? We want your voice heard on Sean Hannity for 3 hours. You get up there and tell them how East Texans think. So seriously, if it hadn't been for the grace of Mike and Cindy, I wouldn't have been able to do Sean's show. And then that apparently went well enough that he's asked me to do it next Friday, August 30th. So. And it really was fun. He's got a great producer, an assistant producer, and you know, he always plays Toby Keith and Martina McBride doing Independence Day, and that's basically all I'd heard. Well, there's a lot of music I like, and so when she sent me an email and said, have you got any music you'd like us to do for bumper music, you know, coming out of commercials, I immediately sent her Neil McCoy's Hillbilly, you know, the Beverly Hillbilly song that he recorded at Longview High School. And so, I don't know if you heard the show, you heard they played it a couple of times coming out of break, and his assistant producer told me during one of the breaks, I had never heard that before, but that is my new favorite song. So anyway, so that was kind of fun, and who knows, we may be able to have Neil on next week. But oh, and I got a text. I said, well, I'm not sure, you know, what his politics are, because I didn't, you know, a lot of people in the entertainment business, they try to be apolitical so they don't lose a lot of listeners or viewers. And I get immediate text messages as soon as I said, well, I don't know what his politics are, but I love his music. Immediately I get a text message that says, you know exactly what my politics are. Anyway, but that was fun to do, and there's just so many things going on, and one of the obligations of a congressman, if he's really doing his job, is to learn everything he can about what's going on in Washington and talk to people both in this district, around the country, to try to educate them on what's happening, but then also to get that feedback and listen to people in the district and what they say, what they think, how they think it. So I never take anything for granted. I really am humbled to be your servant in Washington, and I look forward to answering questions. Now, I had been asked to cover a few things, starting off with, I got my little outline. First thing that was mentioned, Mike had mentioned, was why don't you touch on the IRS scandal. Folks, it is a scandal. There's nothing phony about it. Oh, there's a GMC red vehicle with license plate CR9 R499 terrain. It's parked in a loading zone, and so sure. All right. So, oh, Kathy. Well, you loaded and came in. Is your place going to be open after we finish tonight?
Depends on what time. Yes, it will be.
Okay. Nothing like Casey's gumbo. I've loved it since I was a little kid. But the IRS scandal, I'm sure you've heard some say, well, now it turns out there were some liberal groups that were targeted as well. There were a handful of liberal groups. There were hundreds of conservative groups, and we're still finding out it's not even as restricted as we thought, and now we find out it's not just the IRS. They had also communicated with the FEC, and then I had somebody this week telling me they think they were targeted by another government agency, but I need to check that out. It was truly weaponized. And if you look back after the Citizens United opinion by the Supreme Court that said, yes, it's a matter of First Amendment rights for people to be able to buy time in the media for commercials, you know, as long as it's not orchestrated by the candidate and not have that charged against the candidate. And of course, the president brought that up in his State of the Union address, and actually he lied about what the case said. And you may remember, if you were strong enough to watch the State of the Union address, that Justice Alito sat there, and I've never seen anything like that in the State of the Union address, sat there and was saying, not true, not true, not true. That was incredible. Had that kind, you know, we just never had a president that would flaunt his lack of knowledge about the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court decision in the face of the Supreme Court that knew it all. Little did we know at the time that Chief Justice John Roberts would be intimidated into his most poorly written opinion, whether you agree with it or not. Most poorly written, most illogically perceived opinion. And by that I mean, he had to get over the obstacle in order to even have a decision on Obamacare. He had to get over the problem called the Anti-Injunction Statute, the Anti-Injunction Act, that many years ago was put in place that said if someone is challenging a tax, then they do not have standing to bring litigation in federal court until the tax has actually been assessed, and it has been assessed on that litigant. Otherwise, they have no standing to bring the suit. Therefore, there have been lots of cases thrown out. Lots of federal courts have said, you're suing about a tax, therefore we don't have jurisdiction to hear it yet. It has not been assessed on you, or it hadn't been assessed on anybody. And so they had to get over that. And by page 15, Justice Roberts had covered the fact that Congress was in the best position to know whether this was a tax or a penalty. They had called it a penalty and not a tax. And it only happened if you failed to do the required mandated activity of purchasing insurance. And so it certainly appeared, in all practical purposes, to be a penalty, and therefore the Supreme Court said it was a penalty, not a tax. For purposes of the anti-injunction statute, it clearly is a penalty. And now that we've determined it's a penalty, we can move on and have jurisdiction to decide this case. And then they move on to the merit. He moves on to the merits, and he discusses the Commerce Clause and that it really doesn't apply. But then by page 59 or 60, he gets around to saying, so really this is truly a tax, and therefore we say it's constitutional. Now, if you go to seminars, judicial conferences, they have seminars normally for appellate judges on writing appellate opinions. And something that is just gauche, it's verboten, it's really not appropriate in a well-written opinion, and John Roberts knows this, you're not supposed to ever use the first person pronoun I. And if you read through his opinion, he uses I a number of times. And in fact, you're not supposed to, when you're writing for the majority, ever say, well, you know, if the minority says this, but you know, this is what I would do if I had the ability. And yet he has those references. Well, people do that in the minority. It's as if he wrote a minority opinion. and then all of a sudden, very quickly, converted it to a majority. It was a poorly written decision and not very logical. But as a result, we're having to deal with the consequences of Obamacare. Now, I was at a retirement center, senior citizen home not long ago, and a lady said, you know, there are a lot of us here that are worried that we're not going to get the health care we need. And I said, you have a legitimate worry, because Obamacare took $716 billion out of Medicare. And I know people have been told that won't affect you at all. It only cuts the reimbursement to the healthcare providers. And I said, you know, it really will affect you to help fund Obamacare. And she said, now, is that Obamacare or is that Louie care? And I said, look, you can call it what you want to, but what this president pushed through is going to hurt the care that you're going to get. And it's not, it may not be fair to call the panel a death panel, because they make all kinds of decisions, but they will decide who gets a new knee, who gets a new hip. Well, you've had a good life. Maybe you don't get cataract surgery at your age. I mean, the government should never be in a position to make those calls. And I visited another dialysis center earlier today, and you know, and I'm hearing them talking about the cuts. And something that's very clear is, for many years, since the 60s, people have been relying far too much, year after year, greater leaning and just counting on the government. Healthcare providers, little by little, have been lured into counting on Medicare. Okay, we don't get paid as much for Medicaid, but that may be necessary to get the Medicare, and then we can have insurance patients that pick up the slack. And I was visiting with some healthcare providers in Lufkin yesterday, and they were explaining what Obamacare was going to do to the care that they could provide. And folks, it's sad. Unless we get this turned around, and there is, as I know, I'm sure you've heard, whether you believe it or not, one more chance.